Grace was 35 when everything in her life seemed to collapse all at once. She had been married for 7 years, 7 long years filled with hope, endless doctor appointments, and whispered prayers late at night. Like so many couples, she and her husband had dreamed of having children, of filling their small home with laughter and tiny footsteps. But month after month, year after year, the tests remained negative. The diagnoses became more discouraging, and eventually, the silence between them grew louder than the conversations. Then one morning, Grace walked into the kitchen and found something waiting for her on the table, not a gift, not a note of encouragement. It was a folded piece of paper. Her husband had written just a few lines. "I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore." No long explanation, no goodbye, no final conversation, just those few heartbreaking words, and the sound of the door that had closed behind him for good. Grace sat in that kitchen for hours, staring at the note as if the letters might rearrange themselves into something less painful. But they didn't. He was gone, and with him, the future they had imagined together. She was no longer a wife, and without children, she felt like even her identity as a woman had been stripped away. In the months that followed, Grace continued going to work. She paid her bills. She smiled when people greeted her. But inside she was shattered. The grief she carried was invisible to others, but it weighed heavily on her every single day. She kept asking herself, who am I now? What's left of me if I'm not someone's wife, not someone's mother? But Grace wasn't someone who gave up easily. She had always been the type to find purpose in the ruins. And one Saturday, needing something, anything to feel useful again, she signed up as a volunteer at a local children's shelter on the outskirts of Baltimore. At first, she thought she would simply be serving food or reading stories to toddlers before bedtime. But fate had a different plan. That day, she met 3 brothers, all under the age of 10, who had just lost their parents in a devastating car accident. Their caseworker explained that no relatives had come forward. No one wanted to adopt all 3 boys together. People were interested in adopting one child, but not a package deal, especially not one carrying trauma and grief. Grace watched them carefully from across the room. The youngest boy clutched a worn-out stuffed lion and kept hiding behind a chair. The middle child refused to meet anyone's eyes and flinched when someone got too close. And the oldest stood between them like a tiny guardian, silent, alert, and already carrying the weight of someone far older. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their faces. Not because of pity, but because something inside her stirred. A feeling she hadn't felt in years. A sense of calling. Those boys needed someone to stand in the gap for them. And for the first time in a very long time, Grace realized she needed someone too. She didn't have a lot to offer. Her house was small, a simple 2-bedroom home. Her income was modest, and there was no husband by her side to share the load. But her heart? It was full of love, overflowing even, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. So she made the decision, not a casual one, not impulsively, but a firm, courageous yes. One by one, they came into her life. Jaden, the oldest, was only 9 when he moved in. He barely spoke and often stood by the window for hours, watching the world go by with distant eyes. Grace understood his silence. He wasn't being rude. He was protecting himself, staying alert for the next loss. Malik came next. He was the curious one, always with a question on the tip of his tongue but too afraid to ask. He had a deep hunger to understand the world but didn't yet believe it was safe to wonder. And finally there was Caleb, the youngest, just 5 years old. Small, fragile, with big brown eyes and an intense fear of loud noises. He would jump at slamming doors or even sudden laughter. His trauma was still fresh, still raw. The first few months were difficult. There were tantrums at bedtime, silent dinners, sleepless nights filled with nightmares. Grace sometimes sat in her bathroom with the water running just to cry without them hearing her. She questioned herself constantly. Am I doing this right? Will they ever love me? But step by step, things began to change. Grace learned to braid Caleb's tiny curls every morning before school. She taught Malik to write his name and told him every single time that it was a beautiful name worth being proud of. She encouraged Jaden to speak, not just about school, but about his fears, his hopes, his dreams. Slowly, he began to open up. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. She created a routine, pancake dinners, dance parties in the living room, story time before bed, Saturday movie nights with popcorn on the floor. The boys still struggled with their past. Grace still battled doubt. But love was building something strong and sacred between them. Years passed. Jaden grew into a focused, driven young man. He became a natural leader at school and earned a full scholarship to study engineering at Georgia Tech. His teachers said he was destined to build things, big things. Malik discovered his gift in technology. By the time he was 18, he had launched an educational app that taught math through music. It went viral in local schools and eventually gained national attention. And little Caleb? He turned his old fears into something extraordinary. He began writing poetry, spoken word pieces that explored grief, healing, and hope. He started performing online, and soon, thousands were watching and responding. His voice had found power. The three boys eventually moved out, each to pursue his own path. But no matter how far they traveled, they always returned for the holidays. They never missed a birthday, never forgot Mother's Day. To them, Grace wasn't just the woman who raised them. She was home. Then, on Grace's 60th birthday, something unexpected happened. She woke up that morning to the smell of food and the sound of laughter in the kitchen. The boys, now men, were cooking breakfast, joking like old times. She sat at the table, overwhelmed just to have them all under one roof again. Jaden stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. "Mom," he said gently, "we have something for you." Inside the box was a silver key, tied with a white ribbon. She looked at them, confused. They smiled in return. "Come with us." Outside, a van was waiting. On the back seat were photos of a beautiful new house, not a mansion, but a dream. Spacious, peaceful, with a wraparound porch and a garden full of her favorite flowers, lavender and lilies. "A place just for you," Malik explained. "We designed and built it together." Grace's hands trembled. She tried to protest, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything special," she whispered. Jaden knelt beside her. "Yes, you did. You gave us life when we had none. You gave us hope when we had no reason to believe in it." She cried that day. Not because of the house, but because of what it symbolized. Gratitude, love, homecoming. And the surprises didn't end there. A few weeks later, they handed her an envelope. Inside were legal documents, a trust fund created in her name, funded by the three of them. It covered her medical care, gave her a monthly allowance, and even set aside seed money to start a bakery, something she had once dreamed of but never pursued. "You'll never have to work again," Caleb told her softly. "You spent your life taking care of us. Now it's our turn." And then came one final, unforgettable moment. A year later, all three sons got married. But instead of separate weddings, they chose to hold one big ceremony. 3 grooms, 3 brides, one single breathtaking day. At the start of the ceremony, the officiant asked everyone to rise. "Before we celebrate these unions," he said, "let us honor the woman who made this day possible, the woman who chose love when the world gave her none." Grace, dressed in royal blue, stood in the front row. The entire crowd erupted in applause, long, heartfelt, and thunderous. That moment went viral. Photos of Grace were shared around the world. News outlets titled the story, "The Woman Who Raised 3 Kings." She received a publishing offer. A foundation was named in her honor. Letters poured in from strangers saying things like, "You reminded me of my own mom," and "You helped me believe in love again." But Grace never cared about the attention. What mattered most to her were the simple things: Sunday lunches, little footsteps running through her kitchen again, and the laughter of future grandchildren echoing in the home she never imagined having. She never gave birth to those boys, but she raised them, with faith, with fire, and with a fierce, unwavering kind of love. And in return, they gave her the greatest gift of all, a life filled with meaning, joy, and legacy. Because sometimes, family isn't built through biology. It's built through choice, through presence, through love that expects nothing and gives everything. Grace didn't get the life she once prayed for. She got something even more extraordinary, and that changed everything. Grace proved that the most powerful kind of love is the one that gives, without expecting anything in return, and sometimes, that love comes back to you in the most beautiful way. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to One World Narratives for more true stories that restore faith in humanity. Because one story can change everything,